Rosie and Jim, Tales from the Ragdoll, Volume 1. Hello, I'm John. Rosie and Jim are two dolls who live on the good boat Ragdoll. I travel here and there looking for stories to tell. Then I write my stories down, all about Rosie and Jim and what they will get up to if only they could come to life. Duck sits on top of the boat and keeps an eye on things. Here are all my Rosie and Jim stories, and the first story is A Quiet Place. One cold day, Rosie and Jim were on the good boat Ragdoll when they heard such a noise. Jet planes flew across the sky, lorries rumbled along the streets, cars hooted their horns, people played loud radios on their boats. "What a horrid noisy place," said Jim. "What shall we do?" said Rosie. "Send Duck," said Jim, "for the hermit of Bredon Hill." The old man came down from his hill to see what was the matter. "Can you magic the noise away?" said Jim. "I'll see what I can do," said the hermit. He went into the town to see what it was like. When he heard the cars and the lorries and the buses, he pulled a face and muttered a spell. All the noises disappeared. But without their noises, the cars and buses and lorries couldn't go. They were stuck still on the spot. What a kerfuffle there was! Children couldn't go to school, their mums couldn't go to the shops, boats couldn't go along the river. The whole town came to a stop. People began to argue and shout and fight. It was worse than ever. The hermit said another spell to put the noise back again. "You'll just have to put up with it," he said. "But there's a quiet place over there." He pointed at the church. "That's the place for us," said Jim. They went into the church. "Oh, it's lovely and quiet in here," said Jim. "It makes me feel all smooth inside," said Rosie. "There are pictures in the windows," said Jim. Lovely," said Rosie. But when they came out again, the town was as noisy as ever. "We'll have to grow flaps on our ears," said Rosie. "That's right," said Jim. The Man in the Wind. One windy day, Rosie and Jim saw a big whizzy thing far across the fields. "There's a giant waving to us," said Rosie. "Let's go and see," said Jim. It wasn't a giant. It was a windmill with great sails whizzing round and round. There was a man in it. "The Man in the Wind," said Rosie. The Man in the Wind gave them a bag of flour. "Mix it with water," he said, "and make anything you like." They made a little house with chairs and tables. The house began to grow until it was so big that Rosie and Jim could go into the house and sit at the table. "Let's have a party," said Jim. Lots of friends came. There were cows and sheep and hens, a horse, 2 ducks, a dog and a cat. They were all hungry. "What shall we eat?" said Jim. "Noggin," said Rosie. "There's nothing in the cupboard." The cows ate the walls. The sheep ate the chairs. The cat ate the chimney. "It's all bread, Noggins," said Rosie. Soon there was only a pile of crumbs for the little birds that flew down. "That's the end of our magic house, Fizpot," said Rosie. Rosie and Jim went home to their boat. That was made of steel. No one could eat that. The Junk Serpent. One cold day, Rosie and Jim were going along the canal in their boat when their engine went puff, glug, cluggety-clug, and it just stopped. "We're stuck," said Rosie. The water went Bubble, wubble, bubble, and a great, huge, enormous, gigantic thing came out at them. "Help!" shouted Rosie. "Who are you?" said Jim, picking up a rolled-up newspaper. "I'm the junk serpent," shouted the thing. "I've bitten your boat, and now I want my dinner." The junk serpent swallowed the ragdoll. "How are we going to get out?" said Jim. "Give it the good rubbish," said Rosie, "and be quick about it before it chews us up." So Jim shouted, "Let us out, and we'll give you lots of good rubbish to eat." The junk serpent spat out the ragdoll again. They fed it bags of the best rubbish. It crunched up the empty bottles, it chewed the newspapers, it swallowed the cans. They fed it every day. The junk serpent was happy now. When it laid its eggs, they hatched out into new paper to make nice new books, new bottles for the milkman, and new cans for Rosie and Jim to have a cool drink on a hot day. Ragdoll sheep. One sunny day, Rosie and Jim came to a farm. They saw a little bridge over a stream. They were just going to cross it when a great hairy troll jumped out at them. "Get off my bridge," he shouted, "or I'll gobble you up." "Ooh," said Rosie, "what a noggin." "We'll never get home if that hairy troll gobbles us up," said Jim. So they went back to the farm. The sheep were being sheared. "I know what to do," said Jim. Jim put some wool over himself. "Bah!" he said. "Ooh, you clever noggin," said Rosie. "Is there one to fit me?" Rosie wrapped a fleece round herself. Rosie sheep and Jim sheep crept up to the troll's bridge. The troll jumped out. "Get off my bridge," shouted the troll. "No ragdolls on my bridge." "Bah, bah," said Ragdoll Rosie sheep. "Bah, bah," said Ragdoll Jim sheep. "Are you real sheep?" said the troll. "Bah," said Rosie and Jim. "Then you may cross my bridge," said the troll. Rosie and Jim crossed the troll's bridge. "I wonder if that troll wants a haircut," said Rosie. "Talking sheep now," said the troll. "What next?" Rosie and Jim left the wool for the farmer to collect and went home for their tea. The magic stone. One windy day, Rosie and Jim came to a funny place. A notice said, "Museum." "What's that?" said Jim. "I don't know, Fistpot," said Rosie. "Let's go and find out." It was a long time ago place. More magic," said Rosie. They saw another sign. It said, "Coal mine." They went into a tunnel under the ground. "I feel like a rabbit," said Jim. "Have I got furry ears?" "No, noggin," said Rosie, "but you have a mucky face." There was a wizard under the ground. He gave them a piece of magic stone. "It's cold and mucky and black," said Rosie. "It'll keep you warm on a frosty night," said the wizard. "Never," said Jim, but they took it anyway. Then it was time to go home for tea. When the black stone was safely in the stove, little fire demons came and danced on it, and it made the boat lovely and warm. "That wizard was right," said Rosie. "Magic," said Jim, as he made some toast. A ride on a dragon. One windy day, Rosie and Jim came to a fair by the river. "I want to ride on the dragon," said Rosie. "They gobble people up," said Jim. "Fistpot," said Rosie. "It's only a painted dragon. It can't eat anyone." So they went for a ride on the dragon. But they didn't see the dragon's eye winking as they got on, and they didn't see the dragon's wings stirring and its feathers ruffling in the breeze as the ride began to move up the first steep slope of the switchback. When it came to the top, instead of swooping down the other side, it spread its wings and flew away up into the sky, taking Rosie and Jim with it. "Hold tight," called Rosie as they went up through the clouds. Fasten your seat belts, called Jim. The dragon flew round the mountains of Scotland and across the wild sea. They saw whales and dolphins swimming in the water. They saw the Eskimos in their snow houses. The dragon flew them round the North Pole and home again. "Did you have a good ride?" said the man. "The best in the world," said Rosie and Jim. A ride on an elephant. One sunny day, Rosie and Jim came to a ferry. The ferryman pulled the people across the river in a little boat. His dog came too. "Let's make our own ferry," said Rosie. There was an ice cream tub and a ball of wool in her bag. Rosie tied the wool to the tub and found a place for their ferry. "How can we get our wool across to the other side?" said Jim. "Send the dog," said Rosie. The dog waded into the water with the end of the wool in his mouth. The water came to his knees. The water came to his tummy. The water came to his neck. The water came to his nose. "Woof! Gurgle!" said the dog. "Come back," said Rosie. "You'll be drowned." The dog came back and shook himself dry. Rosie found a stone shaped like an elephant. "If only it were a real elephant," said Rosie. And bingo wingo, it was. "Please, will you take this wool across the river?" said Rosie. The elephant held the wool in her trunk and waded in. The water came to her knees. The water came to her tummy. The water came to her shoulders. The water came no further. The elephant took the wool across the river and tied it to a tree. Then she pulled Rosie and Jim across in the ice cream tub. "I want to ride," said the elephant. She stepped into the tub and made it sink to the bottom of the river. "I'll cross by the bridge," she said. And she did, with Rosie and Jim riding on her back. Tickly Wickly. One fine day, Rosie and Jim were chugging along on the old Ragdoll when they came to a great forest. They walked a long way deep into the forest. "Look," said Rosie, "there's a tickly wickly tree." And she collected some tickly wicklies that had fallen off the tree and popped them in her bag. "And some more tickly wicklies," said Jim. "Those are feathers," said Rosie, "from a bird, not a tree." In the middle of the forest, Jim said, "I want to go home." "Come on then," said Rosie. "Which way?" said Jim. "I don't know," said Rosie. "We're lost," said Jim. "I know that, noggin," said Rosie. "I'm tired," said Jim, "and I want my tea." "There is no tea here," said Rosie. They were both so tired that they lay down under the tickly wickly tree and went to sleep. The wind blew and dropped its leaves on them, and the birds came and dropped feathers on them. Jim woke up. "More tickly wicklies," said Jim. "We're like the babes in the wood." "It's time for the kind woodcutter to come," said Rosie. "And take us to his log cabin for bacon and eggs," said Jim. "That was in a story," said Rosie. "There is no woodcutter here." "No," said Jim, "but there is a good boat Ragdoll." "Not in the middle of a wood," said Rosie. Then a huge bird flew down and picked Jim up in its beak. "Help!" said Jim. "Don't gobble me up." The bird didn't eat Jim. It took him home. My goodness, what a fright it gave the duck when Jim came flying down. Then the bird came back for Rosie. The Glass Witch. One sunny day, Rosie and Jim were riding along on the good boat Ragdoll. They stopped their boat to do the washing up. Splish, splash, bangety crash. Oh dear, Jim had broken a glass. "Noggin," said Rosie, "take care." "What is glass made of?" said Jim. "How do I know, Noodle?" said Rosie. but I know it can cut you when it's broken." Then Rosie looked out of the window and saw a giant witch's hat stuck in the ground. "Let's go and see," said Jim, "if it really is a witch." So they did. But it wasn't a witch at all. It was a place where they make glass. There was a hot place with a big fire in it. Men were putting sand into the hot place to turn it into glass. Then they saw men with blobs of hot glass on the ends of long pipes. They blew bubbles that turned into glass cups and bowls. "That's magic," said Rosie. "Perhaps there is a witch." On the way home, Rosie found a glass marble. They looked deeply into its patterns. "It's lovely," said Jim. "I wish I could draw patterns like that, all swirly-whirly." The witch came whooshing out of the ground with her hat on her head, and whooshed Rosie and Jim to the seaside, where all the sand is. They drew swirly-whirly patterns in the sand. Then they built a beautiful sandcastle where a mermaid came to tea. She poured their tea from a glass teapot, and they drank from beautiful cups. Then they flew home with the witch in time for bed, with the marble still in Rosie's collecting bag, and their shoes full of sand. Looking for a birthday. One rainy day, Jim said, "Did you hear that, Rosie? John said something about a birthday." Rosie said, "What's a birthday, Jim?" "I don't know," said Jim. "Let's go and find out," said Rosie. So they went into the town to see if they could see a birthday. They saw birthday cards in a shop. They saw 2 birthday cakes, but they still didn't know what a birthday was. "Let's ask that little girl," said Jim. "Hello, Rosie and Jim," she said. "What are you doing today?" "We're looking for a birthday," said Rosie. "It's my birthday today," said the little girl. "But what is it?" said Jim. "It's when you're 3 or 4 or 5, said the little girl. "Everybody knows that." "We don't," said Rosie. "We didn't," said Jim. "It's the day you were born," said the little girl. "Only a year later, or 2 years, or 3, and you have a party. Come to mine, then you'll see." So they did. They had a lovely time. "We don't know when our birthday is," said Rosie and Jim sadly. "Well, you can have it today, like me." "Fizzy," said Rosie. "Thanks," said Jim. "Goodbye." Rosie and Jim get lost. Rosie and Jim left their boat to go for a walk in a great garden. They came to a maze. "Can we go in?" said Jim. "Yes," said the man. "But can you come out?" "Noggin," said Rosie. "Of course we can. Come on, Jim." Duck followed them. The maze was a twisty-turny place. They went this way, they went that way, in and out and in, backwards, forwards, up and down, but they couldn't find the way out. "We are lost," said Jim. "I want to go home to tea," said Rosie. "We can't," said Jim. "We're still lost." "Noggin," said Rosie. Duck flew up over the maze. He looked down and saw the way out. "Follow Duck," said Rosie. "Quack," said Duck. "Coming," said Jim. They followed Duck, and they were home in time for tea. The magic hats. Rosie and Jim went shopping in the market. They came to a stall that was full of hats, all kinds of hats. "I'd like a hat," said Rosie. "Me too," said Jim. They tried a few. "Try that one," said Rosie. Jim put a big black hat on his head. Whizzo, fizzo! It was a magic hat. "Help!" cried Jim. He had grown taller than 3 houses. "Take it off!" shouted Rosie. He did. "That's better," said Jim. He was his proper size again. "Your turn," said Jim. "Try this one." Rosie put a big flowery hat on her head. Whizzo, fizzo! It was a magic hat. Rosie grew and grew, as fat as 10 pancakes. "Take it off," cried Jim. She did. "Ah, that's better," said Rosie. She was her proper shape again. "I don't think it suited you," said Jim. "I don't think ragdolls wear hats," said Rosie. And they went home to tea.